I'm John Hinderaker, president of Center of the American Experiment, and we are joined now by Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota. Governor, great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you so much, John, for inviting me to be with you all today.
Governor, you have become rather famous for refusing to order a COVID-19 shutdown in South Dakota. Tell us how you came to that decision.
Well, I think when this virus started to hit the United States, everyone started to evaluate their situation and what best they could do to help protect people and make sure we got through this as best as possible. I had started opening an emergency operations center in January, and we got our first case in South Dakota on March 10th. So we had gone through all the evaluations with my state epidemiologist, my Secretary of Health, got our 3 major healthcare systems involved, heard from them, gotten their recommendations, studied the models, what was happening in other countries. But then I also consulted with constitutional lawyers and with my economic development team, and really wanted to see what the consequences would be for any decision that I would make on families, on businesses, what authorities I had as governor, what our state constitution said I could do and could not do, what our United States Constitution said my authorities were, and I think that helped advise me to make better decisions that really served our people well. So you're right, I did not order any businesses closed. I did not issue a shelter in place for families. So what I did was I gave them all the information that I possibly could, and then I reiterated to them the importance of personal responsibility, that I was going to give them the flexibility to make the best decisions to protect their families, and then also make sure that they could be innovative, especially business owners, that they could take care of their customers, but that they also had the opportunity to take care of their employees and to change their business model, innovate, to protect public health, but still keep food on the table and a roof over the heads of those folks that depend on them to be reliable.
You did a press conference in the beginning, Governor, where you talked about the fact that South Dakotans are Americans and Americans are a free people. Not subject to arbitrary orders from politicians. And you went on to say that in addition, South Dakotans are smart, and South Dakotans can look after their health better than the government ever can. It's very refreshing to a lot of us to hear those words.
Well, you know, if you come into a time of crisis and you have a leader use more authority than what they really are granted or allowed to, that's how you lose this country. And I wanted to be positive that I wasn't the leader that would do that. And so that's why I reminded them about their ability to be flexible in what they could do individually and for their families, and how important that was going to be in the months ahead. We also in South Dakota, when we talked about the virus, told them that our plan was that we knew this virus was going to hit our state and it was going to spread. We weren't going to focus on the amount of positive cases versus negative cases. We were just going to focus on how many people we had in the hospital, because we knew that this virus would come. We also know we can't stop it. Our job was to make sure we were prepared to take care of those folks that would need health care in our hospital systems if they gotten sick going forward. So we consistently focused on the hospitalization rate, told people what to expect, and also said, if you're scared, stay home. If you don't want to go out, we will help get your essential services for you. We'll run errands for you. But you have the opportunity every day to make a decision that's best for you.
And one thing that happened, Governor, is that as a result of the stand that you took on behalf of freedom, you were viciously attacked by people on the left, the Washington Post, the Associated Press. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it was interesting because immediately we had a couple situations in South Dakota where we had a meat processing facility that had a lot of positive cases coming out of it, and they used that as an opportunity to attack me, saying that I wasn't doing enough to protect people in South Dakota. What they didn't focus on was the fact that we had aggressively gone in there and cooperated with that business owner, gave their employees information, gave them opportunities to self-isolate, and facilitated that when necessary. And we addressed it, and it immediately, within a couple of weeks, was a totally different situation. And that's how we reacted in South Dakota throughout this virus spread, was to deal with areas that became situations where people were concerned, but work with local leaders there, work with the business owners to do it, and not put in place statewide mandates that really tied our hands from really meeting the needs of the people in very different demographic areas where a different response is needed most times. A blanket approach often does not give us the flexibility to deal with every community correctly.
And of course, I think every packing plant in the country found that they had some COVID-19 there. Even in states like Minnesota that had the most draconian shutdowns, that didn't mean they didn't have COVID-19 in a packing plant.
Yeah, it was interesting to really see this virus be used as a political weapon. And I think that's exactly what they did here in South Dakota. And I even brought it up in a couple of press conferences too about the disservice the media was doing to the public. And they do it by focusing on information that's sensationalized, that's not the whole truth. And in fact, they promote an agenda by deciding what they want to cover and what they don't want to cover. Very rare, even in South Dakota, did we hear a positive story. Every story that was told was scary, negative. If I gave a whole press conference, they would focus on the one thing that would be extremely depressing and worrisome for people instead of the 10 other things that we had going for us. So for me, I felt like that was a big disservice to our people in the state because they already had enough concerns on their mind. What we needed to let them know was all of the facts, not just some that were picked out by a few with an agenda.
And of course, as it turned out, South Dakota did very well with respect to, or has done very well with respect to the COVID-19 epidemic, if you look at the numbers.
We have, and I also recognize that we're not done. You know, we're going to be dealing with this virus for months yet, and we're preparing for that. So we will continue to see infections. We'll continue to see people get sick and get in the hospital, but we're also seeing people get better. And we're seeing more and more time go by that is allowing us to get more capacity into promoting therapeutics, into getting towards a vaccine. All of that is incredibly helpful. So what I told the people of South Dakota is what you did by stepping up and me trusting you and you trusting me was that it worked. We bent our curve, we slowed down the spread, and every week that passes, we get closer to being even more better and better prepared to handle this virus, and we'll be better off in the long run. Meanwhile, we haven't completely shut down our economy. South Dakota is doing very well with keeping jobs in place, helping businesses get through. You know, we've fared better than the vast majority of other states, and I think it's because we allowed those business owners to go out there and still continue to do business in a way that made sense to protect public health.
I want to get back to the economy in just a moment, Governor, because that's very important. But I live in Minnesota, as you know, and so I'm always comparing how's Minnesota doing with how's South Dakota doing. Well, in Minnesota, we had a very severe shutdown, destroyed our economy, but we still have a fatality rate that is 2.5 times that of South Dakota. Why do you think that is? Why do you think you've done so much better than the state next door?
Well, we have focused on the vulnerable population. So we know those folks that would catch the virus that are older or would have a compromised health system or pre-existing condition, that they are the ones who are going to end up needed elevated health care or are at a higher risk of passing away. So we had really honest conversations with our long-term facilities, with our assisted living homes. They did limit visitors, which helped protect those folks that are living in those facilities, and made sure that we were getting the word out on what families could do if they had someone in their home that really was going to be in jeopardy of having a severe illness if they did catch the virus. I also think that, you know, we just have had 3 healthcare systems in South Dakota too that we over communicated with. My team was working with them for months before this virus hit South Dakota. And they work together better than I think any other state's healthcare systems did. They dropped all need for credibility or ownership or performance and partnered together to take care of folks and work with us and give us all the information we needed to take care of people. And I think it made all the difference in the world in helping families get through this.
You know, here in Minnesota, as I'm sure you know, we've had almost 80% of our fatalities take place in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. You obviously in South Dakota have avoided that, and frankly, disaster, you know, that we had here. Is that basically by prioritizing those people, or how did you do it?
I think so too, but that statistic may be true as far as how many people we've lost that are at a certain age range, just because of they're more susceptible to passing away from the virus. But we did not lose close to the number of people. And I just think that we had a lot of administrators of these facilities that took it seriously. And then my Department of Health team aggressively went out there and worked with them. And then we tested every single individual in these nursing facilities, in these nursing homes and assisted livings, and gave them as much information. And as soon as there was a positive case, we isolated that individual. You can't let someone who does have COVID-19 stay in that facility and expose other residents to that type of situation.
You know, there's been a lot of back and forth about masks, as you know. First, the authorities, the experts said masks are worthless. And then they came back and said, well, no, maybe they're not worthless after all. And now in some states, governors are ordering mask wearing 24 hours a day, seemingly. Have you made recommendations on masks in South Dakota?
I haven't. I would say that in South Dakota, we've consistently referred to CDC guidance, but the science on masks is very mixed. There's not good science using them or not using them. In fact, some of the studies that people point to most often, some of them were promoted that were not even reliable data sets that they were using. So that's concerning to me. And then they also talk about the value of wearing a mask, especially if you're asymptomatic. But we also know, studying this virus, that asymptomatic people very rarely spread the virus. They aren't the ones who are out there spreading it through passing it on to other people unknowingly. So what I tell people is wear it if you're comfortable and if you feel like you need to. Definitely, there's certain situations where you may be called upon to do it. And then I certainly wear a mask if it's required in the situation that I'm in, but I don't think the science by any means has proven to us that they are a useful tool. In fact, most of the times I see the masks being worn improperly or not laundered and not sanitized, and that certainly isn't helpful.
Yeah. I saw a news report that South Dakota was going to collaborate, I think, with the federal government in carrying out a substantial test of hydroxychloroquine, if I'm saying that correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I haven't seen any results from that. Is that test concluded or still going on? And what have you found?
The trial that included hydroxychloroquine was paused for a while because the lead research institutions, Sanford Health Research, decided to do that based on a couple of other studies that were going on across the country. But that really was a monumental feat to get that study off the ground, because it was the first time that we had a statewide, state-backed trial involving 3 different healthcare systems in the country. So to get them to partner in the way like that and have the support of the state government was incredible. And that may be something they come back to. Now, that research facility is running many other studies and trials, and they're running a registry as well to track what kind of therapeutics might be helpful in fighting off COVID-19. So there's nothing to say they may not choose in the future to pick it back up and start again. But they've got their fingers in so many other areas that one has been paused for right now.
Let's talk about the economy. You mentioned that briefly, Governor, but by virtue of not adopting one of these harsh, draconian shutdowns and allowing business people to be innovative and continue to work, South Dakota got great results in economic terms, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we obviously had industries that got hit very hard. Tourism is our second largest industry. And when the president got up on national TV and he asked people to stay home for 2 weeks, they largely did. We saw that industry get hit very hard. So hotels, restaurants, bars, those kinds of facilities, saw a lot of their income just dry up immediately. The ability that we gave them to be flexible and to still continue to do delivery or curbside, or to be able to figure out a way to set up their dining rooms differently, I think helped them to get up and running even quicker. Now, we did have some local mayors that made different decisions. There may have been city ordinances in place that closed businesses. But again, that's the prerogative of those local leaders, and that's their role. I have my role. My belief and my conversations with all of those leaders was that they should try to figure out a way to get a plan that they can sustain. Every conversation I had with every local leader they would say, I want to shut everything down, tell people to stay home, close every business. We've got to stop this virus. And I would say to them, well, can you sustain that for the next 6 months? Well, no, not at all. We can, I mean, maybe just for 2 weeks. And I said, well, the virus isn't going to be gone in 2 weeks. In fact, in 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a lot more positive cases. There's going to be a lot more counties that have been impacted. So how are you going to justify letting people come out of their houses at that point, or to open up their businesses when things have only gotten worse? And so that thought process and leading those local mayors and county commissioners through that, I think, was helpful, because it reminded them that every decision that they make, they need to sustain throughout the entire life of this virus hitting South Dakota and the rest of the country. And that could be months, if not a year. There was some restrictions at the local level, but I think we mitigated a lot of them just by processing through how they envisioned maintaining and sustaining the type of activities that they were thinking about mandating.
Now, South Dakota, I think, these numbers bounce around a little bit, but I think South Dakota has had the best record in the country in terms of new jobless claims, having the smallest proportion of new jobless claims during the COVID epidemic. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we did. We had a large amount of people that immediately signed up for unemployment assistance, but then immediately also got back to work and are rebounding quickly, and those jobless claims have been encouraging. So we're doing very well. And honestly, even looking at our state budget, we don't have a personal income tax in South Dakota. We don't have a corporate income tax. We don't even have a personal property tax. Really, how we fund state government largely is from a sales tax. And we saw a very minimal impact to the revenue coming in from sales tax because of the virus, which we were anticipating huge decreases in revenue based on the lack of business that was happening out there. But people were impacted for a couple of months, but then we're seeing it come back now. And we're just hoping now that we can focus on those small businesses and making sure that this dip in their revenue isn't a long-term situation that could end up detrimentally impacting their ability to keep their business going. So we're going to continue to evaluate. I do think this virus will be hurting us economically for quite some time yet, but we weathered the storm much better so far.
Well, another data point to that effect, Governor, the state level gross domestic product numbers just recently came out a few days ago for the first quarter. They run a little behind, but in the first quarter, again, I compare with my state of Minnesota. Minnesota had a 4% decline in GDP, and obviously that's because of the harsh shutdown. South Dakota had only a 2.2% GDP decline in the first quarter. So not only are you getting better health results, you're getting vastly better economic results.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will point to the fact that we've got less people, we've got less larger cities, but I also think that we've seen other states with some of the same demographics as ours get hit harder. And I think it's just because of the way that we responded to the virus, not just taking into account public health, and looking at other countries what's happening, but also taking into account our business model and mental health and families and what we are able to do and to sustain to make sure that we are trying to keep their way of life as normal as possible.
Governor, I want to ask you a couple of questions that have come in from members of our audience. We've got a lot of people watching today. And one thing that I've wondered about, which one of our viewers also is asking, is, was there any coordination within the upper Midwestern states, the 5-state upper Midwest area? Were other governors or other health commissioners, were they talking to each other? Were people trying to learn from you and vice versa? Or was it every man for himself?
No, we were talking all the time. I think I was on conference calls 18 hours a day, and it was with different groups of governors, sometimes all the governors in the nation, sometimes a group of just Republican governors, and then the Midwest governors would get on the phone quite often and just discuss what kind of decisions they were faced with that day, what if other people had faced that same type of decision, how they had responded. Probably the most helpful to me was the conversations that I had with the governors who chose not to put forward universal shutdown orders. There was about 7 or 8 of us that tried to be as open as possible. And, they were, so that would have been North Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Arkansas, Wyoming, Montana. So some of those states, we talked quite a bit because our heart was to stay open. And I was certainly doing that. but we got on conference calls quite regularly and talked about what more we could be doing and pushing. You know, I was telling the story of South Dakota quite often on those calls, and what was working, and it helped them get some feedback, and it helped me get feedback to see what they were seeing on the ground. What I had consistently said was, you know, we were going to look at the facts on the ground in South Dakota. I can hear a story of what's happening in another state, but I would never use that to base a decision on. I would use science, facts, information, but then I would look at South Dakota and what I saw here on the ground before I would make a decision, because what was being done in another state may not be appropriate for here in South Dakota and the tools that we have.
Another of our viewers asked a good question that's in the news, and that is, what is South Dakota's plan for going back to school in the fall?
We're going back to school. We made that decision weeks ago. I think it was even could be close to 2 months ago I made that decision. I was shocked by the amount of kids we lost track of as soon as school was called off. 20 to 30% of our kids never checked in once. That means their parents didn't contact a teacher, they didn't do any homework, they had no learning opportunities. And we're also recognizing, and did before, but it became very real in the situation, how that school and that teacher and that administrator is often the first ones to let us know if there's a problem at home. That if that child is struggling, or they don't have a roof over their head, or if they don't have a guardian or somebody watching over them. So I just believe kids need to come back to school, that gives us an opportunity to really still get them back on track for learning, but give each district the opportunity to be flexible. Each one of them has buildings that look different sizes of classes. Giving them flexibility on how often those kids are going to be in the classroom each week. Let them have smaller class sizes if they'd like to, more time for sanitation. But it's imperative that we get them back on a normal schedule so that their lives can be a little bit more normal in the future.
One of our viewers has a kind of a flattering question, Governor. He wants to know if your ProFreedom Stan has resulted in an increase in people expressing interest in moving to South Dakota. What are you seeing there?
Absolutely. Yeah, I made a comment a while ago that I could almost triple the staff over in my economic development agency department because of people and requests that have been coming to us saying, we want to move our business, we want to be there. I think people are really recognizing the value of leadership that understands certainty and the ability to really trust folks making decisions that are best for them. So that really has been something that we've been shocked by, is the amount of people that already have or are in the process of moving to South Dakota.
Well, congratulations. In the time we have left, Governor, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about something completely different. On July 3rd, the eve of the 4th of July, you were at Mount Rushmore, obviously South Dakota's major world famous monument, with President Trump and many others. You got to speak at that event. Tell us a little bit about that. What was it like to be at that event with the president?
Oh, it was fantastic. You know, the president we were so grateful and honored that he came to Mount Rushmore. He gave an inspirational speech of unity. I had asked him to get us fireworks back at Mount Rushmore about a year and a half ago. It was right after I was elected as governor. I wasn't even sworn in yet. And I was at the White House visiting on some economic panel discussions. But we also I happened to say to him, could you ever help us get fireworks back at Mount Rushmore? We lost them about 10 years ago during the Obama administration, and would love to have the opportunity to showcase not just Mount Rushmore, but the state of South Dakota. And he was excited about that. He followed through. He helped us get it done. And it was a fantastic evening. Just absolutely wonderful. And I think a great moment for our country.
And Mount Rushmore has been in the news too, because it's under attack from the left. I mean, leftists are threatening to blow it up or try to deface it somehow. And the lieutenant governor of Minnesota, my own state, said on the 4th of July that Mount Rushmore is a white supremacist monument, and that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and the others memorialized there committed genocide. What do you make of this?
Well, that's just simply not true. And I think the point that they're missing is that our leaders have flaws. They do. We've never said that our founders we're perfect. But I think by focusing on those flaws, we miss the opportunity to really learn from their virtues and what they brought this country. And that's what those 4 men represent on that mountain, is different aspects of our country's history. You know, George Washington was the only man that unanimously was elected to lead this country. And then they wanted to make him king, and he said no. And he walked away from his commanding position and also from the presidency. You look at Thomas Jefferson, he gave us the words, all men are created equal. Abraham Lincoln made it reality. You look at Teddy Roosevelt, he gave us some of the greatest treasures of our country by preserving the West, and also was the first person to invite an African American to come and dine at the White House. So while we could focus on all their flaws, I would hope that we would learn that not any of us have lived up to all of our own ideals. Rarely do people end up perfectly. I haven't met one yet, but that's our history, and we can't wipe away our history, or we risk wiping away the principles of the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy in this country today.
We only have you for a half hour here, Governor, and I want to wrap up by asking a couple more good questions, I think, that have come in from some of our viewers. Marissa asks, it is so difficult to make a stand, but it seems like everyone is standing against you. Where did you find your courage? What drives you?
You know, I would say it was probably just from growing up with my dad. My dad was a cowboy, and he was tough, and he gave us impossible things to do every day. I just remember being a little girl out on the farm and the ranch, and him telling me to do things, and me thinking there's no way I could do that. But it wasn't an option to not get it done. So I tell parents all the time, we are crippling our children in this country by doing everything for them. Our job is not to do things for them, it's to prepare them for life. And I think one of the greatest gifts that I ever got from my parents was they made me a problem solver. They gave me incredibly challenging things to do and expected me to do them. And that helps you get through difficult situations. And instead of looking at the problem, you look at how you're going to get through it, solve it, and make sure it's the best decision possible.
Another of our viewers, James, has a question about an aspect of the COVID response that didn't come up in our conversation that's interesting to me. He says, how about communications and cooperations with the Native American Indian tribes and reservations? You've got a significant Native American population in South Dakota. How did it go integrating them into your COVID approach?
We have 9 Native American tribes in the state of South Dakota. I would say very well. Every day our Department of Health has been participating with tribes, getting them information, more testing supplies. A lot of their health care is delivered through Indian Health Services. So we were working with them to get them more machines and equipment that they needed. I think that with a couple of our tribes, they set up checkpoints at their reservation borders on federal and state highways, and that got controversial because they don't have the authority to block a federal highway or a state highway. But what most people don't know is the hundreds of hours of conversations behind the scenes, how many months we had been working and talking to them, and how much we're facilitating delivery of healthcare on the reservations. Instead, what a lot of people see is some controversy in the news over checkpoints, when in reality, the partnerships with the vast majority of our tribes and Native Americans has been very good.
We have time for one more question from the audience. Governor Noem, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Final question, Ed wants to know, do you have any desire to run for president in 2024? You would be great for America.
No, I do not. I spent 8 years in Washington, D.C. I am so happy to be home in South Dakota. In fact, this morning, I was out running my horses out to the farrier to get new shoes on them. And before I started my meetings, and I was thinking about how wonderful it is that I get to do that. I don't remember a day in Washington that I got to start my day like that.
All right. That's a definite no, but who knows? Things could change. Governor Noem, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you.
That'll bring our program to an end. Thank you all for viewing.
You bet.